A journey into the wild, away from the city's chaos, was something we had never considered before. Every morning was the same. We woke up early, the streets already filled with honking cars and rushing people, everyone in a hurry to reach somewhere. The noise was endless, a constant hum that never faded. I worked long hours, coming home exhausted, while my wife was always tired from managing the house and her own responsibilities. Our children had no time to play, no time to simply be kids. School, homework, routines, every day felt like a blur. We had everything we needed, yet something was missing. A sense of freedom, a breath of fresh air. One evening, as we sat together at the dinner table, I looked at my family, the tiredness in my wife's eyes, the quiet longing in my children's expressions. And I made a decision. "Let's go on a trip," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. My wife raised an eyebrow. "A trip?" she asked, as if the idea was foreign to her. "Yes," I nodded. "A long trip, away from the city, away from the noise." My children, who had been silently eating, perked up with curiosity. "Where will we go?" my daughter asked, her voice tinged with excitement. "Somewhere quiet," I said. "Somewhere beautiful." For a moment, my wife seemed hesitant, but then a smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I like this idea," she admitted. That was all it took. My children cheered, already dreaming of the adventure ahead. The next day, we packed our bags, clothes, food, water, and a sturdy tent. We gathered blankets, a small stove, and everything we thought we might need. This time, we wanted to be prepared for anything. At the break of dawn, we left the city behind. The towering buildings slowly faded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the distance. The farther we drove, the quieter the world became. The endless honking was replaced by the rustling of trees. The thick air of the city exchanged for something purer, something refreshing. The road stretched long and empty, flanked by tall trees, swaying gently in the morning breeze. I rolled down the windows, letting the crisp air fill the car, and for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: peace. Hours later, we arrived at the edge of a vast forest. The trees stood tall and proud, their emerald leaves forming a canopy overhead. The sunlight filtered through the branches, casting golden patterns on the ground. A river, clear and glistening, flowed nearby, its water crisp and cold. Birds chirped from the treetops, their melodies blending with the gentle rustling of leaves. Everything was alive, yet nothing was rushed. It was a different world altogether. We stepped out of the car, stretching our legs, inhaling the fresh scent of earth and greenery. My children wasted no time. They ran off, their laughter echoing through the forest as they collected leaves and small stones. My wife stood beside me, taking a deep breath. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice almost reverent. "It's perfect," I replied, feeling the weight of the city slowly lifting from my shoulders. We found the perfect spot to set up camp, right by the riverbank. Working together, we pitched the tent, my son helping me with the poles, while my daughter held the ropes steady. My wife arranged the blankets inside, making it feel warm and inviting. In no time, our temporary home was ready. As the sun began to set, we sat by the river, watching the water move in rhythmic swirls. The sound was soft, soothing, like nature's own lullaby. I dipped my hand into the cool water, feeling its crisp touch against my skin. My wife sat beside me, her fingers brushing against mine. "This is what we needed," she whispered. I nodded, staring out at the golden horizon. Yes, I agreed. This is home, for now. That night, we built a fire, its flames flickering against the darkness. The wood crackled, sending sparks into the cool night air. We huddled close, feeling the warmth against our skin. Above us, the sky stretched wide, filled with stars so bright and endless that they seemed to belong to another world. My son pointed up, his voice filled with awe. So many stars. More than we can count, I said, watching the sky with him. For a long time, we sat in silence, simply existing in the moment. No cars, no sirens, no rush, just us, the fire, and the vast, untamed wild. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly free. Morning arrived softly, the sun rising behind the trees, casting a gentle glow over our camp. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Birds flitted through the branches, their songs welcoming the new day. I stretched, breathing in the freshness, letting it fill my lungs. Behind me, my wife and children were still curled up inside the tent, their faces peaceful. For once, the city felt like a distant memory, like something from another life. Smiling to myself, I knew we had found something special here, something we never knew we had been missing. The days in the forest passed with an ease we had never known before, each morning stretching into an unhurried afternoon, each evening settling into a peaceful night. Time moved differently here, slowly, deliberately, as if savoring its own existence. We spent our days exploring, walking along narrow trails softened by fallen leaves, listening to the wind weave its quiet melody through the towering trees. The river became our constant companion, its voice a steady murmur that never ceased, a reminder of life's gentle persistence. My children played with the river stones, building small towers, skipping them across the water's surface, laughing each time a ripple danced outward in perfect circles. My wife and I watched them, feeling something bloom within us, something quiet yet profound. It was the realization that we had been missing this, not just nature, but the simplicity of being together, of existing without deadlines, without the weight of schedules pressing down on us. One afternoon, as the sun poured golden light through the branches, we climbed a narrow hill that overlooked the vast stretch of the forest. The ascent was slow, the path winding between thick trunks and moss-covered rocks. My daughter held my hand, her small fingers curling tightly around mine, and I could feel her excitement with every step. "Do you think we'll see the whole forest from up there?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Let's find out," I said. As we reached the summit, the trees parted, revealing a breathtaking panorama of green, endless and undisturbed. The river glinted in the distance, a silver ribbon weaving through the heart of the land. My son stood in silence, his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat. "It's like a sea of trees," he murmured, and I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. My wife slipped her hand into mine, her gaze soft with unspoken thoughts. "This is the most beautiful place I've ever seen," she whispered. I looked at her, at the light in her eyes, and for the first time in years, I saw a version of her that had been lost beneath the exhaustion of everyday life. She was lighter here, unburdened. We all were. We sat there for a long time, watching the wind move through the forest, feeling the warmth of the sun on our faces. My daughter plucked a bright red leaf from the ground, holding it up to the sunlight. "Can we take some things with us?" she asked. My wife nodded. "A few small things," she said, "to remind us of this place." But I knew the truth. We didn't need to take anything. This place had already imprinted itself on us, had settled into the spaces within us that had long been empty. As we made our way back down, the path felt different, as if the forest itself had shifted. The trees seemed taller, their roots deeper. The air carried a weight that hadn't been there before, a quiet knowing that we were approaching the end of our time here. At camp, we packed our things slowly, reluctantly, as if stalling could somehow change the inevitable. My children folded their blankets with uncharacteristic quietness, their usual chatter replaced by a contemplative stillness. The fire pit, which had been the heart of our nights, lay in ashes now, the last embers fading into gray. My wife ran her fingers through the cool dirt beside it, tracing invisible patterns, her thoughts far away. Finally, she looked at me, her expression unreadable. "This place changed us," she said softly. I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep within me. "It showed us what really matters," I said, and she smiled, a small, knowing smile that held both gratitude and longing. The drive back was different from the journey there. When we had left the city, we had been desperate for escape, for something unknown and untamed. Now, as we returned, it wasn't desperation we felt, but something heavier. Something that made us want to turn the car around, to linger just a little longer in that untouched world. The buildings rose slowly on the horizon, the roads grew busier, the air thickened with the familiar scent of asphalt and exhaust. The sounds of the city crept back in, the honking, the distant shouts, the hum of electricity in the air. My children pressed their faces against the window, watching as the trees disappeared behind us, their branches reaching out like silent farewells. That evening, as we stepped into our home, something felt different. The walls seemed closer, the rooms smaller. The air felt heavier, as if the city itself carried a weight we had never noticed before. My wife walked into the living room and paused, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. "It's so loud," she murmured, though there was no actual noise inside. It was the city itself that was loud, even in its quiet moments. The invisible hum of it, the way it pressed against us, filling the spaces we had only just cleared. My son dropped his backpack by the door and sighed. "I already miss the forest," he admitted. My daughter sat on the couch, turning the smooth river stone in her hands, a distant look in her eyes. "Me too," she whispered. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened for the sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the river's steady voice, the crackling of the fire. But they were gone, replaced by the muffled sounds of distant traffic, the occasional siren slicing through the night. I closed my eyes and tried to hold on to the feeling of the forest, to the clarity it had given me. I thought about my wife's words. Maybe we don't have to leave. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something, but the beginning. The next morning, as the city roared back to life outside our windows, my wife and I sat at the kitchen table, our hands wrapped around warm cups of tea. She looked at me, a quiet determination in her eyes. "We need more of that in our lives," she said simply. And I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't just about taking another trip, another temporary escape. It was about changing the way we lived, about finding ways to bring that peace into our everyday existence. It was about choosing a different kind of life, one that didn't revolve around noise and deadlines and exhaustion. And so, we began making changes. Small ones at first. Weekend hikes, morning walks, evenings spent outside instead of in front of screens. We planted a small garden, started eating dinner on the balcony under the open sky. But the biggest change was in us, in the way we moved through the world. The forest had given us something we couldn't ignore, a reminder that life wasn't meant to be rushed through, that there was beauty in stillness, that happiness wasn't something we had to chase, but something we had to make space for. The city didn't change. The streets were still busy, the buildings still tall, the noise still constant. But we had changed, and that was enough.